I'm Jay Mandal. I'm a fellow at Stanford, CodeX and Guest Lecturer at Stanford. And if you heard my talk yesterday, I'd like to expand a little deeper on the area of AI agents and ways for human-machine collaboration in the area of law. So I'll give you a macro perspective and why it's very important, in my opinion, and exactly how I think we can actually think through very complex workflows using AI agents. So first thing that I'll walk through is just give a very simple definition of how you would define an AI agent. Here, the first thing is that they're actors that can reflect, plan, use tools, and collaborate to achieve outcomes. Let's break that down. First thing is that when you actually have a tool that's able to reflect, not only does it take an action and start to give you an output, it reflects on it to determine if it actually is the right output and make sure that it's providing the right answer, so some level of reasoning. The second area is to plan, that when you have an agent, it just doesn't give you an answer. It plans what itself or other agents will do in order to achieve that particular outcome. Let's say it's drafting a document or drafting a contract. Third area is use tools. It's very interesting. There's a story of a company called Devon, which is a coding software. And so when Devon was using the software, it was basically an AI software. It was put out in the wild by a software company. And what it was doing is that it was told to achieve a task. It actually went about, when it didn't know how to achieve the task, it used tools like Slack and email to actually figure out how to solve the problem such that others who were interacting with Devon actually thought they're interacting with another person. They said, hey, Devon's a pretty good guy. What's funny about the story too is that my son's name is Devon, so it becomes an interesting segue there. And then the last thing is collaborate, is that you have agents that are able to collaborate with one another. So if you think about it, we'll talk about it more. You can actually have, let's say someone who's specializing in drafting contracts, another one that's specializing in patents, another one that's specializing in being the senior attorney overlooking the work, one that's specializing in actually making sure the formatting is correct. So they can collaborate with one another in order to achieve a task. And so this is a very loaded statement as to what it really is. So let's walk through kind of the macro as to why this is important. Now, a lot of legal tech solutions that we know today are actually in the areas of e-discovery, legal research information, contract management, practice management, compliance risk, legal analytics. You can name various companies associated with each of them. E-discovery, there's various companies in that space. Relativity and Everlaw. Legal research and information are dominated by large players in the space like LexisNexis and Westlaw, but there are others in that space as well. But the thing that's very interesting about all the legal technology that is currently being offered is that these things are basically things that support legal services and law firms. They're a tool that you use to support. They're not actually implementing the legal services, but when you talk about agents, you can actually deliver legal services, which was very interesting. And so let's talk about this. I presented a very audacious sort of vision of what a firm would be. So let's accelerate into what that would be. There was, if you're familiar with this, incubator, there's a very famous incubator in Silicon Valley called Y Combinator that's been behind a lot of great companies. They incubated companies like Dropbox, at least Stripe also came out of Y Combinator. And a lot of the top engineers globally try to apply and get into their classes and try to build different companies. It so happens that a lot of their batch happens to be dominated by AI companies, and a recent partner had a statement to say as to what exactly would be the next generation of AI firms that they'd like to create. They specifically referenced the law space. So if you read this, they say, at YC, we suppose you believe that LLMs are now able to automate a lot of legal work. There are two things you might do with that idea. You can build an AI agent and sell it to law firms, or that's what most people do. Or you can start your own law firm, staff it with AI agents, and compete with existing law firms. So instead of selling it to dinosaurs, you can make them extinct. So this is actually a statement. This is not a legal incubator. This is one of the top incubators in the world using legal as an example as to what exactly you could be doing in the space. So, so this is not just my audacious belief. This is the belief of others as well. So let's break down what exactly would an AI agent do. So if you have an AI agent, then you think about how do you break down the different tasks that would be done by an AI agent. You would have AI agents that specialize in specific tasks, They can specialize in general corporate transactional areas like M&A, drafting contracts, commercial law, litigation areas as well, the various steps in the litigation process. They could also specialize in legal specialty areas like patent law or immigration law, or the areas of family law or landlord-tenant law. So these agents could actually be the ones specializing in how to think through these areas and attack a problem in this manner, especially if it's a matter that requires cross sort of practice disciplines to attack a matter. But the other areas are something interesting as well. You have to have generalists too. And I think the real core of this is really the quarterback or the traffic controller. The brains is to determine if you get ingestion of some information from your client, ingestion of like exogenous factors, market forces, what does that quarterback, what does that traffic control do? Which attorney or AI agent does it send it to? Does it send it to the M&A specialist? Does it send it to the employment lawyer? Does it send it to where? And then what happens in the process? When the output comes out, do they send it for review, for collaboration? And so you start to have other generalist AI agent tasks like reviewing things, like a senior attorney would review the work of a senior attorney like you have at a firm, or someone who's specialized in diligence, like the first-year attorney, or one that specializes in formatting to make sure it's compliant with the needs of the client, or abiding by the rules that are set by the law firm or by the client. So if you start to look at this, what's interesting from a very macro perspective is that the reason why a lot of venture capitalists are getting excited about this, and also investors, is that you change the whole trajectory of what you think about the total addressable market of legal technology. Legal technology, if you look at the defined from before, was actually the TAM is that low line that basically still hovers at near zero, because we're talking about trillions of dollars of actual total addressable market when you actually start to deliver legal services. So again, the TAM for legal technology services peaks at around, in the close to like 100 billion in terms of the actual TAM. But if you go after legal services using AI agents, the total addressable market could be as much as in 2025, up to 1 trillion globally, and up to 1.5 trillion in the 2034 timeframe. I'm not saying that you'll go after all of it, but when it comes to investment, they're saying, hey, you could be replacing legal services in some extent using these agents. So I'm going to talk really quickly about the research work that we're doing. Is that how do you go about doing this? Because it's definitely a very ambitious idea to think that agents could do very complex things like M&A. So myself and my collaborators at CodeX, we actually did some research as to how do you do this? Now, the biggest sort of things that were brought up even yesterday in terms of the critique of these models is first that there's hallucinations, that when you have agents, they make incorrect decisions, if guided incorrectly. Secondly, you can go astray. So not only do you go astray when you make the wrong decision once, if you make the wrong decision at one point, an AI agent basically tries to get to the outcome. So one mistake gets compounded into 10 mistakes. And so you have a situation where you're not even close to the end result that you want to achieve. And the last one is they don't have domain expertise to make the decisions in some cases. So how do you address these issues? So we contemplated this in the paper that we drafted called Rethinking Human AI Agent Collaborators for the Knowledge Worker. And we said, okay, there's actually a paper that's out there that's called the CollabGym framework for real-time interactions between human and AI agents. And they essentially say that when you actually have a scratch pad, or you have a place where the agent has a way to interface with a human upfront in the work plan, a way for the agent to actually ask questions, provide answers to an individual before they develop the plan, that they're much more performant in getting the outcomes that they want to get. So you apply that, and that's the research work they did in a very general space. So we apply that in the said, if you have a scratch pad where at every major decision point that the agent interacts with the lawyer to make sure that they're making the right decisions up front, you make sure you don't have hallucinations, you don't have these agents going astray. And so how do you do that? You first have to decompose the workflow. You have to make sure that at every milestone of a transaction, let's say an M&A workflow, that you have decision points where perhaps with the human and ask questions to make sure they have the right work plan. And then secondly, you make plans at decision points. Where are the decision points? The first decision point in any contract, because a lot of you are lawyers here, is when you initially plan the transaction or the case or deal. You got to make sure that the agent asks questions to make sure they understand the intentions of the lawyer on how to attack the matter and get the domain expertise as to where they have questions. And then the beginning of each stage or milestone, like in an M&A transaction, upon diligence or upon an LOI, a letter of intent, or upon transaction documents, and then the introduction of a new material change. So oftentimes, like in an M&A deal, like, I'll be doing an M&A deal back in the day. And in the middle of it, all of a sudden, there's a new IP issue. All of a sudden, there's litigation on the most important patent we're trying to acquire. So therefore, at that point would be a point at which the agent would interact with the human lawyer and figure out what exactly is the situation, how should I address this issue, and the lawyer can advise accordingly. And then as a result, the last point, they'll reorganize and act and create a new work plan. This is exactly, I'm not saying anything that's rocket science here. This is exactly how humans interact in doing transactions. And so that's the model that we created to kind of think through this. And I won't go through this in detail, but like I'm walking through, my background is M&A. Like this is the deals I did at Apple when I was at heading up for M&A. This is like, and this is common to a lot of M&A attorneys here that have done stuff, like all the way from pre-diligence to letter of intent to diligence, drafting, negotiation, closing of a deal, integration, and post-closing work. At each stage in this process, when I decompose it, and from your experience and my experience, I know this is stuff that an agent could do. It's not like lawyers have clear domain on a lot of this work. An agent can do diligence. An agent can actually draft transaction documents. It's just that at each stage of the process up front, as I noted, they would actually plan with an agent, and at each milestone, then also plan with the agent to understand the intentions. And for example, if there's that huge patent litigation or that IP that all of a sudden came up that's under litigation, in any stage of the process, you interact with that agent and reorder the process accordingly, and then work with that agent in order to move through accordingly. So that's the model that we're proposing for human and machine collaboration for AI. And we look forward to actually doing more work of actually showing this in operation in our future sort of papers. And I'll hand it over to my fellow speaker here, John. Sounds good. I don't have Zoom link. Yeah. So link to mine. We'll have questions afterwards. I want to make sure we set up.
Awesome. So underpinning the AI agents and other AI tools that Jay just talked about is going to be data, right? The AI agents or other tools, they're only going to be as good as the tools that they have access to, the data that they have access to. And so I'm going to walk through a quick case study that we of a product and data enrichment that we at Jus Mundi have put together and underpin some of our technology. So first off, I'm John. I'm the tech lead for the Jus AI team at Jus Mundi. And a quick introduction about Jus Mundi for those of you who don't know. So Jus Mundi was founded in 2018, and with a mission that actually closely aligns with something that Jay had talked about in his talk yesterday, which is democratizing access to legal justice. And back in 2018, a big problem that was facing the international law and arbitration space was data access. Arbitration cases were oftentimes not available at all, hidden behind confidentiality agreements, et cetera. If they were public, they would often be difficult to find, even more difficult to search through, et cetera. And so that was the first challenge that Jus Mundi sought to solve, right? Is making more international law and arbitration cases and documents publicly available, searchable, et cetera. And once we collected and had a large database of those documents, right, the next steps were, how do we enrich that data further? How do we make it more easy for lawyers and arbitration professionals to search through? And in arbitration, as in many other aspects of law, right, the text content of a document only goes so far and only provides so much information. And for a lawyer, who's researching that case, researching about that document, they want to know more. They want to know, how is that treaty, how is that case, how is it used through time across jurisdictions. How, do tribunals refer to it in different languages, et cetera. And this is a complex research task for lawyers and arbitrators. And so at Jus Mundi, we started working on this project called Sitemap, where we're trying to automatically detect and track these references to documents throughout other documents, and then make that available to legal professionals while they're doing their research. So on the screen here, you have an example of a treaty and a certain article and paragraph within that treaty. And to the right here, and the treaty itself is the New York Convention of, I'm forgetting the whole name. And you see that, okay, this particular paragraph has been referenced by 16 other cases, right, that we have in our database. And so you could click through and you could view those cases. You could view how is that particular article or the document as a whole, how has it been referenced? And you could really better inform your legal research. And so to very quickly step through, how we both built and improved this sitemap functionality, right? So there are a few steps that are involved, right? There's the actual extraction of the references themselves, which is the name density recognition type problem. There's the disambiguation of those references, because will not only be referred to by the exact name of the document, but oftentimes by other references further on in the text. And then there's a linking procedure in terms of taking those extracted references and associating them with the documents that we already have in our database. And so our first version of this, I'll say it was quite, rough and ready, but it did the job. It was a series of regexes and rules. That doesn't mean chaotic. We were using a tool called Gate out of the University of Sheffield to kind of organize that process. But it allowed us to quickly start doing this, quickly building up the data set of these references and citations. And so not only collecting that data, but also, like I showed you on the website, providing it as a tool and service to our clients. But then later on, we decided to revisit. Obviously, there were rules and limitations to the rules and regex-based system. And so we looked to train and fine-tune a BERT-based model to kind of do that named entity recognition automatically. And so my colleagues performed that work and also submitted that paper, which I have here. Also happy to send the link if you come and talk to me later. I believe it was a fine-tuned DBERT v3 model. It was trained on both publicly available legal named entity recognition dataset, but also the data that we had been collecting through our rules-based and regex-based system previously. So you could really clearly see that, you could start small, start simple, and then use and leverage what you have to kind of build up to more complex solutions. All right, and so now it's going to tie back into AI agents and other AI products, right? So when we launched Jus AI, we also wanted to leverage this rich sitemap data. And you could do that in a number of ways. Let's say, so if you're using a RAG-based system, informing your retrieval, because you already have this graph and these links between documents, right? So if a user comes and asks you, how has this case been interpreted or cited by future tribunals, you could directly already, make that connection and retrieve them much more relevant content than if you were using a naive approach. It also has implications for ranking, let's say, because, a case or a treaty that's been cited much more often, you could see that being more important perhaps, and maybe a more important starting point for where the lawyer or arbitrator would want to perform their research. All right, and yeah, sorry I rushed through that. I know we're tight on time, but just a final shout out. We're looking for full-time employees, both with legal and tech backgrounds. So feel free to scan the QR code if anything I was saying interested you today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Does anyone has any questions for either Jay or John from the presentation? Here you go.
I thought it was a really good presentation. I'm curious, when you moved away from gates because of the capabilities of architecting them from online, have you considered or did you discount the idea of just using many of these foundation models themselves and fine tuning them and just doing batch prompting, or did you really feel you had to create your own model from scratch?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd have to look at the exact timeline. I think for the model, it was maybe in the 2021, 2022 time range. So the publicly available models at that and foundational models, at least, were much more limited. So I think that played a lot into the decision.
Amazing. Anyone else?
Thank you both for your presentations. I have a question for you guys. I think the idea of an AI law firm is very ambitious. I'm curious where you see like the most opportunities, like this niche case where this could actually work in the short term.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think the one I mentioned yesterday, that there is a firm called Garfield, which I think is addressing some areas when it comes to the level sort of debt collection areas. And so areas which seem to be not addressed by attorneys right now because they just seem to be lower sort of revenue areas. There's also a company who is a freshman that walked up to one of our conferences maybe 4 or 5 years ago and created a company called Do Not Pay that basically does traffic. And he was amazing. He dropped out after that and started his company. We also had a very interesting incident where he had an attorney come into a trial and had him with an earpiece and tried to use AI to have the attorney respond back, which creates some censure. but nevertheless, it's great to have ambitious entrepreneurs. But so I think the Do Not Pay. So the low hanging fruit would be the for innovation. I think the areas, I go back to the area of access to justice. I think access to justice is the area where you have the greatest field for AI innovation because, as I mentioned yesterday, amongst lower-income individuals, over 80% of them are underrepresented or not represented at all. So those are areas where we should be looking at AI law firms because it provides people rights that they would, but for AI, would never achieve those rights. And then the second one is the area of jurisdiction. It happens UK is more progressive than we are in the US. As certain jurisdictions allow for more, are more apt to allow for AI in providing that. So that's the other area you look at, the intersection of those three areas.
Yes. Can I ask a follow-up question to that? So in the context of access to justice. Yes.
In the context of the example from access to justice. So right, we know that LLMs are very good at certain things and less good at other things. So in that context, where do you see that there might be like a specific niche that completely AI legal firm could add the most value? And so is there a very niche case that's like very underrepresented by legal firms right now that an AI can solve and also be very good at?
Yeah, no, I mean, well, that's very interesting. I mean, it's very near and dear to me. When I say access to justice, this is something that I've been very passionate about for over a decade. And so I started a company, very humble company, in which we were trying to basically, on an iPhone, allow individuals to ask questions and get answers back within 24 hours because they could not access them and provide it at 1/10 the cost. So we identified, when I went through that list of action practice areas, it's because those are the practice areas we identified as the areas that individuals most like: family law, wills and trusts, landlord-tenant issues, areas of basic contract. So these are some of the areas that were really hot for us. Labor employment, basic for the labor employment. These are areas that for people who have a lower income, they just don't get answers to. So those would be the areas that I think would be low-hanging fruit. And also AI is getting better by go on and do some research when you get the chance. Don't take it from me, but actually go out there and see the comparables of ChatGPT versus the actual legal service providers that provide a solution. And you'll see from the research that ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or Mistral, like all of them are actually performing at a very high levels against some of the actual legal specific providers. So I'm very encouraged by that. That just means all of us legal service providers, maybe we have to do even better. That's just the great thing. We just have to push harder. So I'm excited by that.